Everyone is on the internet. We're glued to our phones, tablets, and laptops, streaming media over cloud services we barely understand. We can't claim ownership of anything we watch or listen to, as media consumption is increasingly reliant on renting rather than buying. This renting process relies on a constant, uninterrupted connection to a handful of corporations built in the wake of the internet. This is the future, and it is now. It is the same for everyone, no matter who you are. Time as we know it is increasingly being displaced with the time of the internet, which is always on. Space is supplanted by flow, characteristic of our network society. We are never able to be in one place. We are always moving, going, in search of our next material desire. Except, well, hold on, there's also no way that this can be true, not least because I wandered up and down this bloody shopping centre for 20 minutes with a GoPro trying to get footage of people looking at their phones instead of looking at each other. I mean, look, don't get me wrong, people were looking at their phones, but they were doing so in attempts to get to meet each other. They were doing so to try and catch up with the people that they were meant to be with. No one was glued to their device more than I was. People are looking at their devices more than ever. It's definitely a fact. It's just that it might not be happening in the way anyone imagined. Let me put it another way. As the employee of a UK university, just like the students of a UK university, I can get high-speed internet access whenever I like.
The thing is, I could be here where I am right now at the University of Dundee, which is about 450 miles away from where I work. But even though I'm here, if I just go onto my phone and go onto the Wi-Fi settings, then I'm able to connect to Eduroam, a wireless network that has got connections in over 100 territories across the world, and instantly I'm connected to high-speed internet access. In fact, I didn't even have to connect. It connected me automatically.
Without having to consciously try, walking near most academic institutions, many hospitals, and some conference centres in the UK, I am treated to rapid uploading and downloading speeds, enabling me to do research or host seminars as and when I need to. However, something that the University of Dundee also has in common with many UK universities is that it's built on a public thoroughfare. While Eduroam access is available to all staff and students, it isn't available to the hundreds or even thousands of people who will walk past universities like King's College London, the colleges of Oxford and Cambridge, and many more. While this is to be expected, after all, Eduroam is a perk of working or studying at a UK university, it's worth bearing in mind things that you can otherwise take for granted. How many people are walking through fields that could provide them with free high-speed internet access? Who's entitled to it, and who isn't? At the same time, it's interesting to consider the ways people would use these networks if they could. There's an assumption, after all, that university staff and students will predominantly be using this high-speed access for research. Would most people, if given access to Eduroam, use it to access sites like JSTOR, ResearchGate, and Sci-Hub? Or would they, much more likely, use it to stream Netflix and to access their chosen social media? This phenomenon of differing access to or use of the internet is often referred to as the digital divide. Which leads us neatly to the subject of this video. Just what exactly is a digital divide? And could it be that there are actually many types of digital divides? A standard definition of the digital divide is something that prevents every member of a society from having equal access to or from making equal use of digital technology in an equal manner. For example, the global distribution of wealth, cultural attitudes to digital technology, social attitudes to class, race or gender, and age all impact on who can access digital technology in a given society. These factors can be considered digital divides in the right context. In some senses, these divisions are likely expected. In the book Understanding New Media, it's explained that these patterns of diffusion fall broadly along the lines of distribution of material resources and income. We might not like it, we might not think it's fair, but a country with a lower GDP than the UK or the US is likely to have markedly different access to the internet. Much of this is simply to do with infrastructure and the cost of data for ISPs. For instance, in the UK, it costs British Telecom upwards of £50 million a year to deal with the increased data traffic that is demanded for trending Netflix shows. However, for many countries in the world, this is simply an untenable expense. As a result, in developing digital powerhouse countries like India, for example, Netflix is working directly with the country's mobile network providers to develop infrastructure and support the demand for the streaming service themselves. So, digital divides are the difference between two countries' access to the internet. Okay, cool, okay, I got it. And this is mostly economic, right? Okay, cool, fine. Well, except digital divides are visible even within single countries as well. In the UK, for instance, there's a marked division between the role of the internet in England, and particularly in London, as opposed to how it's placed in the economy of Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland. Accounting, tax, and consultancy firm BDO valued London and the South East's tech firm at £47 billion, and the entire contribution GVA of digital technology to the UK's economy is estimated at around £150 billion. By comparison, the GVA of Scotland's tech sector is closer to £5 billion. While this comparison is unfair for many reasons, not least being the size of the countries, Scotland only has 1/10 of the population after all, it is still somewhat surprising that so much of a country's wealth can be located in a small part of its landmass. To compare more fairly, while the tech industry of the UK as a whole has grown by 43% in the last few years, Scotland's has grown by only 26%. Digging deeper into the statistics, we can see that Scotland's service industry, along with food and drink, is contributing more to the country's economy than digital technology. Now, the same can be said of the UK as a whole, but well, the story is more complicated there, as digital technology plays an important role in those industries. In Scotland, however, it's estimated that over £5 billion of the service sector alone can be attributed to the country's whisky industry. Given the importance of products like these, steeped in the country's culture and history, but entirely reliant on centuries-old techniques that cannot be changed lest it impacts the quality of the product, a complicated relationship between technology and industry is visible. Given Scotland's history as a digital technology pioneer, giving the world one of the early home computers in 1987, the Sinclair Spectrum, and games like Lemmings and even Grand Theft Auto, there is not and never has been a real physical barrier to digital technology in the country. This has to make one wonder what's going on here. If barriers to digital success aren't simply related to who can physically get access to the technology, what is the main reason for digital division? And why are some places becoming more successfully steeped in the digital than others? When it comes to defining digital divides, it's important to think beyond a question of access. But this isn't easily done. In fact, most early research into digital divides was predominantly concerned with questions of access. Prior to 2001, if a researcher was discussing the digital divide, they were most likely talking about physical or financial barriers to entry that were literally prohibiting users from accessing the technology. Digital divides, it was believed, was simply a story of the haves and the have-nots. Those who could afford the internet or were otherwise able to access it through privileged positions in life, and those who couldn't. Looking back on this period, DiMaggio and Hargitay, writing in 2001, reflected on how internet scholarship throughout the 1990s viewed the internet in a positive light. It was believed that the internet, by which I mean a vast network of underwater data connections between computers that are switched on as much as possible, and particularly the small section of this referred to as the World Wide Web, would radically increase equality of access to information by dramatically reducing its cost. We can see this kind of optimism in lots of early writing about the internet, such as, for instance, the Hacker Manifesto from 1986. This early piece of internet culture discusses the point of hacking and places the act above harming or stealing information from others. Rather, it states that hacking keeps the internet free from unnecessary boundaries and regulations, reminding people of the power and the limits of computers. By the same token, early attempts to integrate the internet into politics, such as Ross Perot's Electronic Town Hall proposal, view the internet as a force for good and social change that would radically enhance the power of democracy for all, placing everyone on an equal footing through the provision of a phone line and a computer.
Is bury yourselves in the room with one another, put together the best program, take it to the American people, use the electronic town hall, the kind of thing you're doing here tonight, build a consensus, and then do it, and then go on to the next one. But don't just sit here slow dancing for 4 years doing nothing.
Thank you.
However, by 1996 and the introduction of the American Telecommunications Act, an act that encouraged the development of internet technology through financial competition over any social good, it became clear that the internet would serve more as a bastion for commercialization than any democratic freedoms. This change in views is visible in academia of the time, as by the time the late 1990s had rolled around, several researchers, including the National Telecommunications and Information Administration's first study of the digital divide, called Falling Through the Net from 1995. Well, these scholars were noting that those who had greater access to the internet were those same people with greater access to education, to income, and to other resources. You guessed it, whites, men, and residents of urban areas. However, this concern about inequality and the possibility of technology that it might actually be exacerbating rather than ameliorating the problems still focused on the digital divide between those who could get online versus those who could not. It was still a case of the haves and the have-nots. To an extent, in the context of the 1990s, this view of digital divides did make a certain amount of sense. Less than 5% of the world were using the internet regularly, so it was crucial to discuss infrastructure and issues such as cost and stability. However, from the early 2000s onwards, researchers began to voice the opinion that it was not enough just to be able to physically and financially access the internet, and started to look at other factors in play. Esther Hargitai's landmark paper in 2001 suggested that to define digital divides, we needed to break them down into two main categories. On the one hand, we could look at questions of access, as these pertain to financial and physical factors to using digital technology. Moving on from that though, we can also engage with a range of more social and human factors, such as autonomy of use, whether you can use the internet in private, use patterns, like what you're actually looking at on the internet, social support networks, like if you can ask anyone for help with using the internet, and finally, one's own skill, your just ability to use the medium efficiently. Similarly, Jan AGM van Dijk, influential author on the subject of the network society, breaks digital divides into four major subcategories: motivational access, material or physical access, skills access, and usage access. For Van Dijk, the main cause of the digital divide remains division of resources, but rather than simply viewing resources as material, we must also see time, space, privacy, and support as resources. In practice and attempt to define digital divides for ourselves, we might reflect on our own personal history of internet use and try to put all of this into some kind of context. In my own life, I've always had computers in my home, and I've always had support using them. My family wasn't wealthy, but my single mother was thankfully always employed, often working several jobs at once, and encouraged my sisters and I to develop our digital skills from a young age. My mother had basic knowledge of computer programming, and for her age group, she was remarkably competent when it came to using computers. She confidently used email, online calendars, online banking, and installed an ADSL line and broadband as soon as the technologies existed. Computers, for me, were a means to access video games, and while I can't recall my mother ever explicitly helping me figure something out on a computer, I do remember her encouraging me to look it up myself using the internet. I wanted to play games, but I had a limited budget. However, I had other resources. I had support, encouragement, time, and private access. So while I couldn't afford to buy the newest consoles, I was able to, for instance, take the time to download and figure out how to use emulation software. In some cases, this meant doing things as extreme as learning how to read small amounts of other languages just to understand enough to keep progressing with the game. In Jan van Dijk and Hargitai's terms then, I was relatively well off, not that divided from the digital. I didn't have a lot of money, but I had support. I had periods of private access to the internet to use it as I wanted, and I had been exposed to enough technology that I was motivated to use the internet in order to solve problems rather than simply using it as a toy. Applying this to a broader area, returning to my earlier ruminations on Scotland and the UK more generally, we can understand the UK and its digital divide more explicitly. To be blunt, the average wage in Scotland is around £26,000 a year. This is significantly below the UK average, but not so significantly that it would be out of the question to pay the £80 a month that UK homes pay on average for telecommunications access. This makes it clear that in Scotland, the digital divide isn't a question of access, but must be characterised in some different way. Given the rise to online and digital gaming and the popularity of online media, it would seem highly unlikely that there is a lack of interest in engaging with the internet. However, if we stop to think about how the average internet user utilizes internet access, about what it is they're doing online, it starts to become tantalizingly clear what a digital divide might truly be. In Dutton and Blank's 2013 survey of internet cultures for the Oxford Internet Institute, they defined 5 distinct online cultures, giving each of them names that are, frankly, incredibly awkward to say. The immersives, the techno-pragmatists, the cyber-savvies, the cyber-moderates, and the a-digitals. Most users, however, fell into the cyber-moderate cluster, where the internet is an efficient and enjoyable tool, but little more. This, I think, begins to answer exactly what might be characteristic of today's digital divide, and going some way to explaining what's happening in the UK. Most people in Scotland and outside of London are using the internet, that's for sure. However, the manner they're using the internet is limited to casual use. The majority of users aren't searching for answers or attempting to optimize the technology that they own or improve their minds. The internet has inherited the place of the television before it. It is a source of cheap entertainment, and this in turn comes to take on a generational role, as those who see the internet as nothing more than a source of cat videos and TikTok challenges pass this impression on to their children. Rather than encouraging children to find answers by using the internet and using it well, comparing multiple sources and evaluating the legitimacy of claims, most people use the internet until they tire of it and move on to something else. To draw on a final academic perspective here, Nico Carpentier discusses the idea of participation in his 2016 article Beyond the Curtain of Participation, and attempts to clear up exactly when participation goes beyond the level of simply taking part in the internet, and when it actively starts to shape it. Adopting a critical and political perspective of online participation, rather than seeing the internet as a place characterized by a democratic nirvana, as was hoped in the early 1990s, today the internet is defined by divisions in power. Very few people actively and meaningfully participate online in a way that shapes the internet. Looking at the UK once again and the division between North and South, and attempting to define a digital divide clearly, we might look to recent history and digital innovations and ask ourselves who it is that's really shaping the internet and why that might be. To take just one example, recent decisions about the UK's 5G infrastructure, decisions that will have lasting impacts on the country's data usage for decades to come and serve as a boundary to truly innovative technologies, have exclusively been made in the UK's south. Tests have been carried out in Wales and in the West Midlands, but nothing so far has been carried out in Scotland. Putting this another way, however, we might start to ask ourselves about questions of representation on the internet. who it is that we expect to see being an influencer or being a driver of technology. For instance, reflecting on why it is that the Scottish Government does not more actively embrace Dundee's birthplace as one of the most successful video games ever made, Brian Baglow, the head of the Scottish Games Network, simply suggests that this is because we are Scottish. In a similar way, Eugenia Ciapera's research has found that there is no fundamental division to access along racial lines in the UK. In fact, Black and Asian users were found to have marginally more access to the internet using personal devices like mobile phones. Yet, similar studies in the US revealed that while Black and Asian users may have had internet connections, there is a gap in what the internet is being used for and in what length. Fewer non-white users are creating innovative content, for instance, or using the internet for academic research. Now, while mixing up racial terminology and the divide between the north and south of the UK, it's important to try and clear up exactly what's happening in England and the rest of the UK. We're not likely to be seeing the kinds of uses that amount to really participating on the internet outside of a small sphere of towns. Users outside of these small, powerful geographical bastions are still not able to shape the internet in their own image. What then are digital divides? Well, they're lots of things. Fundamentally, digital divides are anything that impact on equal internet access, but they're also the myriad political and social phenomena that impact on internet use. I think, however, there is something more fundamental happening here in the UK, and perhaps in the rest of the world as well. Digital divides are revealing and even replicating pre-existing power struggles and material inequalities. They might even be making them worse. When attempting to answer just what is a digital divide, we must consider the issues of internet access that come from disparities in global wealth distribution. However, we must also consider the issues of culture and attitudes tied into this global context. In this, we must recognize that digital divides are, in some ways, amplified versions of geopolitical divisions already in existence. Digital divides are, in many ways, the same old divisions as before, but spread wider and faster than ever. More importantly than trying to define the divides themselves, then, is trying to understand what seems to be the central division of digital technology. What is that empowers certain users' participation, and what is it that keeps so many using the internet in a casual manner? What are the policies and actions that allowed these divisions to come into being? Are they actions like the passing of the Telecommunications Act of 1996, the semi-destruction of US net neutrality in 2018, or the passing of the British Snoopers Charter in 2016? Or should we be looking deeper? Is there simply an ongoing system of education and ideological indoctrination that prevents significant shifts in the makeup of the world's power structures? Maybe. But on the other hand, if that's the case, is there any chance for progress? Maybe we've come too far. Perhaps it's important to pick our battles and focus on digital divides one step at a time, not to catastrophize, but to hopefully pick things that can be changed and hope that the small things add up to something bigger. But what do you think? Are digital divides easier to understand than I've made them out to be? Should we be looking at the bigger picture, or should we be focusing on fixing the small things within our power? Be sure to let me know in the comments below, and thanks for watching.